Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to a random review. Today's random review comes from 1968, and it's Jules Dassin, or Dassin, depending on what country you're in, his film Uptight. Now this is an amazing film. I will say after only one watch, which isn't really an objective number of times to watch a film, I would say this is my favourite Dassin film, and possibly his best. My first experience of Jules Dassin film was Rififi, so I always thought he was French, but he's actually American, who, to escape blacklisting, ended up in France and then made Rififi. He moved to Greece and then came back to America. So he kind of knows about being an outsider and such. So this film kind of made sense for him to make. It's adapted from the 1925 book The Informer by Liam O'Flaherty, which is about the Irish Revolution. John Ford then made a film in 1935 called The Informer about the Irish Revolution, and originally Paramount wanted to make this an updated remake of the John Ford film, but Dassin felt this has to be about black revolutionaries at the time. Now obviously 1968 was when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and the fact that this film was made in 1968 and it starts 4 days after the assassination of Dr. King, for a mainstream studio like Paramount to do such a film is pretty incredible. I will say up front, I did cry at the end of the film. I haven't cried at the end of a film probably since seeing Umberto Pasolini's Still Life from 2013. I might actually be earlier than that, with Eddie Marsan, because that was basically a film about my life almost, and I found that very powerful, and I found Uptight extremely moving at the end. Co-written by Dassin and the wonderful Ruby Dee, who also stars in the film, and Gillian Mayfield, who also stars in the film as the lead character. Mayfield was a civil rights activist, obviously, as was Ruby Dee, and an author, not so much an actor, but he gives a phenomenal performance in this film. It co-stars lots of familiar faces, but the names might not be that familiar. Frank Silvera, Roscoe Lee Brown, Raymond St. Jacques, who is Coffin Ed from Cotton Comes to Harlem, one of my favourite blaxploitation films, along with Gravedigger Jones and Godfrey Cambridge. Max Gillian, Richard Williams. The music is by Booker T and the MGs. I have since ordered the soundtrack. I have about 5 Booker T and MGs albums, but I really need to get more. The soundtrack is just amazing. It's the only film that Booker T and his MGs actually scored, which is kind of a shame, but it's a phenomenal soundtrack. So this is imprint 221. This is one of those imprints that I would highly recommend you get. Apparently There is a copy of the film on YouTube, I think, if you want to check out on YouTube. But I suggest you just buy it in physical media, just because. This has a commentary by film historians Elaine Silver and Jim Ursini from 2023. It has Christina Newland, the critic and writer, on Uptight from 2023, and Elective Vicissitudes, which is quite hard to say at this time in the morning, The Radical Exiles of Jules Dassin, a video essay by Daniel Kramer, who, if you saw my In the Frame episode on Sidney J. Fury's box set by Imprint, Daniel Kramer is the one who's involved with Sidney J. Fury, including doing a documentary. It's a phenomenal release of a phenomenal film, but shall I actually talk about the film first? So as I said, this is made in 1968. It's set 4 days after Dr. King's assassination. And I generally get a bit emotional about Martin Luther King anyway, because I think he was one of the greatest human beings to ever live, and we have let him down badly. That's one of the sad things about the film, is the fact that, yes, some things have changed, but not a lot's changed really. And I don't think Dr. King would be that proud of us. I think we've all let him down. I think we should think less about me and more about us, but then I'm not from your planet, so there's that. Anyway, so obviously we have kind of two factions in the black community, those that were with King and the kind of era of non-violence, and then the more revolutionary side who want to take up arms and settle scores through violence. So we have a group led by Raymond St. Jack, and we have the more peaceful non-violence side, led by Frank Silvera, who hold their conferences in an abandoned bowling alley where there's literally lanes between them. And we meet the character of Tank Williams, played by Mayfield, who is a bit of a drunk. He is a member of the revolutionary group, but on the night that they go to raid a munitions factory or warehouse to get some guns, he's too drunk to go, as he is upset about King, but also upset about other things. You know, he worked in the steel mills for 20 years, then had some problems, so he's struggling to make money, struggling to pay Ruby Dee, the mother of his children. So he's not in a great place. So the other three guys, including Max Gillian's Johnny, they go to the factory. Johnny leaves his jacket behind. They get guns, but a guard is killed on the way out. Now, how he's killed, obviously might question your view of the events that unfold. So Johnny is now wanted by the police, and they are putting up $1,000 reward. You can pretty much figure out where this is going. There is a character played by Roscoe Lee Brown, who is a police informant. He's an openly gay character, but he's actually treated fairly well in the film. There's not a lot of homophobic slurs in the film. There are racial slurs in the film, so there is the use of that word. Even though, strangely enough, not by any white characters. So Tank, because of the fact that he's a bit unreliable now. He's been dropped from the group by the leader, Raymond St. Jack. So he's frustrated at this, annoyed at this. He's drinking a bit too much. And I don't think it's spoilers to say that he informs on Johnny, even though, as he says later in the film, the only two people he's ever loved is Johnny and Ruby Dee. So there's a lot of frustration in his part. There's a lot of kind of self-hatred, which is obviously certainly something I can identify with. So I mean, Tank isn't necessarily a bad guy. He's not a villain. He's just been pushed in various directions. He's been ostracised, and this is before he informs. And then the film. So the film essentially has two manhunts. It has the manhunt for Johnny, and then the underground manhunt for Tank by the revolutionary group, not by the police, because the police don't really care because they got Johnny. Another spoiler alert. But again, it's a complicated film, and again, it's a film that wouldn't be made now because it shows the flaws in everybody's arguments. It shows the flaws in, the violent revolutionary side. It shows the flaws in the non-violent revolutionary side. There's a wonderful scene when Tank is a little bit tanked up, and he's in an amusement arcade, and a group of middle-class white people come in, almost on like a ghetto safari, and they're asking him questions, and they're kind of joking with him about the revolution and what's the revolution going to look like. And there's a wonderful scene in the Hall of Mirrors where they're all standing there, and of course they're all altered their appearance in the Hall of Mirrors, and he breaks down what the revolution's going to look like. You'll wake up in the morning and there's no water. You'll wake up, there's no electricity. You'll go to phone the authorities, there's no phone because we've cut the phone. You go to the bank and you don't have any money left. And then of course the white people, including Alan Oppenheimer, again another face you'll recognise, not necessarily the name, that quickly doesn't become a joke anymore, and they actually stop laughing at the prospect of a black revolution, and so they end up not being as amused as they were when they came in. So that's a wonderful scene. The kind of impromptu trial on the steps inside the bowling alley, and everybody's perfectly positioned in a mid-shot frame. It's a really good looking film, but Dassin, who personally I'm used to just seeing black and white Dassin films, but this is obviously a colour film. He uses locations brilliantly. He uses the backdrop of the steelworks. It's set in Cleveland, which I should have mentioned. So it's set in Cleveland, which again, like Pittsburgh, like Oakland, one of those places that used to have industry, but obviously doesn't have as much industry as it used to, and obviously Detroit as well. But the impromptu trial by the revolutionary group of Tank is just wonderfully staged. There's a really moving speech about blood bank and how much money blood banks give people, when Tank is desperately trying to think of excuses of how he ended up with money in his pocket. The film literally ends in a nice metaphor for hell. It's just an absolute stunner, and as I said, I found it extremely moving at the end, because as I said before, Tank's not a bad guy particularly. He's just made bad choices. It's about 104 minutes, which is absolutely perfect. It gives you time to get to know everybody, get to know their character, and especially Tank. And as I said, I mean, Julian Mayfield, I think, actually only was in like 2 films, so he's more a writer and a civil rights activist than an actor, but he gives a really wonderful performance. I mean, Raymond St. Jack is basically just stoic and internally furious through the whole film, but doesn't kind of let that fury out. So that's a kind of almost, there's not much nuance in his performance. He's just kind of angry at Tank most of the time. Richard Williams is really good as another voice in the revolutionary group. There's so much great dialogue about the struggle and that balance between the non-violence and the violence. There's some nice set pieces, and as I said, Dassin really uses architecture well. Some really nice, compressed sets and compositions, especially when the police get the tip off about Johnny, and how he's kind of cornered is very well shot. As far as the music, as I said, it's an absolutely brilliant score. Near the end of the film, during the kind of second manhunt in the film, there's not a lot of music. It's kind of bubbling underneath, and then Booker T and the MGs kick in, and it's just one of those great musical kick-in bits in a film. But in the end, it is a tragedy. It's a tragedy about Dr. King, obviously, and the aftermath of that. It's a tragedy, the fact that no matter what community you look at, even though there might be one goal, there's always division. There's always people that want to do it one way and people who want to do it the other way. And again, we'll never sort out any problems because everybody's right. Nobody's willing to compromise. Everybody's right. Everybody's opinion's right. And if you don't agree with somebody's opinion, you're an idiot. There's no kind of middle ground. And again, that's why it is a sad film, the fact it's 1968 and we haven't really learned anything. Technology has moved on, leaps and bounds since 1968, but society hasn't really moved on that much in the grand scheme of things, which again is pretty sad and depressing. But it's a wonderful film. Again, it's just one of those films that really clicked with me on an emotional level, and you can't get enough of Ruby Dee and Raymond St. Jack because they're awesome. So that's Uptight, a later Jules Dassin film that I would highly recommend. As I said, I think it's on YouTube, but again, pick up the imprint if you can, because it's just wonderful. Again, a film that just wouldn't be touched nowadays, it wouldn't be made nowadays, because again, it pretty much shows everybody's flaws, no matter what side you're on. But it's just another essential imprint title, I would say. But then, again, my opinion is definitely not fact. So thanks very much for watching this random review of Uptight. If you've seen the film, tell me what you think of it. Tell me what your favourite Jules Dassin film is. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, saying farewell.